Hey, welcome back to Anti-King.
Who is that?
Today, I am back and we are doing yet another horror you probably slept on. A very special one, in fact. We're covering a forgotten gem from what's probably most considered the golden era of horror, the 80s. Following the breakout success of John Carpenter's 1979 classic Halloween, the slasher genre erupted in the 80s. I'm not going to run through the history in detail here, because that's likely going to be a video essay in the future, but this eruption flooded the market with cheap knockoffs and unforgivable cash grabs. I'm looking at you, Silent Night, Deadly Night 2. And they came at a breakneck pace. One of my favorite things about this era in horror history is just how many of these gems were just completely forgotten for no other reason than the sheer volume of slasher content at that time. Today's episode is also meant to help introduce a new series I'll be starting soon, based around the same concept called Forgotten 80s Gems, starting the last week of July with The Prowler. Intruder was released in 1989 and features Evil Dead's Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi in a rare acting role, but their names being featured so prominently on the cover is the 80s version of clickbait, basically, as their roles in this movie are limited, to say the least. It was written and directed by Scott Spiegel, who, speaking of Evil Dead, actually co-wrote the script for Evil Dead 2 with Raimi. The movie benefits from a unique take on and setting for a slasher. It takes place in a grocery store at night after our main character Jennifer's spurned ex-boyfriend causes a physical altercation and is eventually set loose in the store to pick off the night crew one by one.
The night crew had nothing to do with it.
As I said before, slashers were done to death in the 80s, and with this coming out in 1989, I'm sure the filmmakers were eager to do something to set their film apart, and I think for the most part it worked. Don't get me wrong, this is just a cut and paste slasher set in a grocery store, but the change in setting allowed for some truly innovative kills, which is a must in any slasher. Speaking of the kills, they are this movie's strength, bar none. Oftentimes, slashers are burdened by their inability to come up with unique and interesting ways to kill their characters, and we end up with countless unimaginative stabs and slashes. Intruder takes its time getting to its first kill, and it's an off-screen dud. However, virtually everything after that is incredibly inventive and high-octane gore. I love the meat hook kill, and the table saw kill is one of, if not the most slept-on slasher kill of all time. That thing was nasty. The effects are top-notch, and they were done by none other than the legendary Gregory Nicotero, who we just talked about in my Planet Terror video, as he also does the effects for that movie. The practical gore effects for the buzzsaw scene really highlight his legacy as a Tom Savini understudy perfectly. These kills help to fill the gap of a pretty thin story, because the plot for this movie is nearly non-existent. There's some setup exposition in the beginning, then basically an hour of loosely connected action/kill sequences, and some ending exposition. That's it. It's not necessarily a bad thing, or even unique to this particular kind of movie, really. 80s horror, particularly slashers, often involve very little in the way of storytelling, making room instead for more suspense and kills. The twist at the end is the closest thing we really get to a plot or a story point. As it turns out, the boyfriend was a red herring and the real killer is the co-owner of the store, who goes on a killing spree to prevent his business partner from selling the store. It's pretty unnecessary and doesn't really add anything, so I'm not sure why it was included. The other weakness of this movie would be the score for me. It felt dated even for a movie that's older than me. It actually takes a weird turn for the better about an hour into the movie, but not only is it too little too late, but it makes the score feel kinda uneven. I'm really interested in the story behind how the score came together, honestly. Because with all due respect to whoever made it, it feels rushed and inconsistent, almost like halfway through someone else was hired to replace them. The acting also isn't great, but it's exactly what you would want from this kind of movie. Over the top and almost cartoonish with some iconic one-liners.
Anal itch got you down.
Not only that, but the movie is really anchored around the performance of final girl Elizabeth Cox. She brings an outstanding energy to this role and holds up some otherwise poorly planned sequences. I was disappointed to find out she didn't have a more prominent role in the slasher genre, but I don't know, maybe she just got in on it too late. She does everything the role asks for, and her performance is a strength of this movie. The direction is solid, I'd say. The shot selection is visually interesting and the pacing was excellent. I will say, however, there are some strange choices made in editing. Some shots linger a bit longer than they should. A lack of cuts during some action sequences really saps the movie magic, and every now and then scenes are interrupted with B-roll that just feels kind of out of place. It speaks to the low budget of this movie, and while it's weird, it doesn't really distract from the overall quality of the product. It's never blatantly bad, just confusing at times. The movie followed a familiar slasher trope of having the final girl slowly discover the corpses of all the movie's victims, and I wanted to mention that here because I think it's another thing that this movie does really well. These sequences over time became corny and predictable, but Intruder, despite its place being in the latter part of the slasher wave, overcame that brilliantly. A bulk of this movie's tension derives from those sequences, and I'm willing to forgive that incredibly awkwardly filmed and edited freezer sequence because of it. The shot where she finds the buzzsaw victim's head was beautifully conceived and surprisingly impactful in such a silly movie. And while I didn't really like the twist reveal in this movie, I did like the actual ending. While Bill, the actual killer, the co-owner of the store, dies in a toppled phone booth behind them, he uses his last breaths to cast blame on the entire massacre on the two survivors, and at least on surface value, it appears the police believe him, dooming them to an uncertain fate. So that's it, that was 1989's Intruder, an incredible slasher anchored by fantastic kills and some supremely tense sequences. For this series, I like to rate movies based off of 6 things, those 6 things being tension, kills, plot, acting, sound design / score, and direction. While not necessarily the focus of this movie, the tension throughout is incredible, especially the corpse discovery sequences. With so much space afforded by a bare-bones script, it was important Intruder got this right, and I think it did. I don't have to spend too much time talking about this one. Just see the buzzsaw kill, the hook kill, even the stabbing with the blood mixing with the beer for the sprinkler effect. That was super clever too. Anything done by Gregory Nicotero in the future will probably just be a 10 for me. The plot is practically non-existent, and I hate the twist. That being said, I know to some extent the thin plot is by design, and the twist almost out of necessity, and I do like the uncertain ending, so I'll give it a little something. Acting was not great, but also pretty much par for the course in this genre, in this era. And that being said, again, Elizabeth Cox played an excellent final girl, which gave this a little bump. Another weak point was the sound design / score. As I mentioned, it felt slapped together and a little disjointed, changing fairly dramatically near the end, incorporating different instruments and subtle creepy tones rather than piano and orchestral stings every single opportunity. I liked the music in the last part, so I'll give it a few points for that. And this movie has me wondering if I need to include an editing segment in these videos. Because while Spiegel's shot selection is actually fairly imaginative, the movie feels really amateur with its editing, and I didn't know where else to dock points for that than here. Without the minor distraction of editing standing in the way, I think I'd actually be praising the direction done on such a shoestring budget here. So I've got 42 out of 60, which is a little over 67%, and this movie would have been so much higher if not for a lackluster score. And while it docked quite a few points on the overall score, these really are minor factors that are easy to overcome. If you're into 80s slashers and this one somehow made it past you, you definitely want to go watch it. Anyways, thanks again for watching. I hope you liked this video. Please remember to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Stay tuned in July for the first episode of Forgotten 80s Gems. Next week, I'll be doing 2 more episodes of Horror You Probably Slept On, with the horror comedy Dead Before Dawn and the psychological thriller Compulsion. Hopefully, I will see you guys then. Until then, stay safe.
Because I had the foresight not to wear any underwear, Tim. Very funny, you dick.